Hey everyone, how you doing? This is Chris with another episode of the Virtual Voice. I'm here today again with my friend Fernanda. How you doing, Fernanda?
I'm good, thank you. And you, Chris?
I'm doing great. Thank you. So today we don't have a guest today, but we're going to cover something that is important to us. One of the things that are important to our companies and to us personally is our core values. And one of the core values we have is always improving. And in that always improving, we have certain people that we study, listen to, or read. And so that brings us to today's topics. And what's that today?
So today's topic is good influencers to follow. So we have a pretty good list here. So the first one that we have on the list is Joko Willink. So I know, Chris, you listen to all his podcasts.
I
Me
do.
too. Like
Hmm.
some of our trainings are also based on him. So what can
Exactly.
you tell us about Joko?
Yeah, so he's all about discipline, right? Everything is about discipline. One of the things that he says often is discipline equals freedom. In fact, there's a flag hanging in my garage that I ordered from his store that says discipline equals freedom. And so he wrote a book, and I'm sure that many people who are listening already know all this stuff. But in case you don't, he wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. Essentially, it starts off with him in a combat situation where something went really bad. People got hurt, and at the end, he took ownership of everything because he was in charge of the entire operation. And because of that, he was commended by his superiors, saying, "Hey, I appreciate you doing that." I mean, there's a lot more to the story, but that really kind of was an influence in his life where it's like, okay, there's something here about taking ownership. So he and his partner Leif Babin wrote a book called Extreme Ownership, and then they followed up with another book called The Dichotomy of Leadership. But yeah, Jocko does have a podcast. It's called the Jocko Podcast, so it's not hard to find. And they do range from about 2 hours, sometimes 5 hours. So they're very long. However, you'll find yourself really, enthralled in the whatever it is they're talking about, because the guests that he have are very uh, interesting, and they have great stories, and there's a
Yeah.
reason why he's on this podcast. So yeah, and we also used him for some of our team trainings. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it was the first or second training that we did, take ownership in
Hmm.
all that you do. So it was really good. The team liked it.
Yeah.
Like, I think our last training was also about that, just like
Yep.
ownership, one of our
Right.
last trainings. And everyone said like, we love Joko. Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
really good. Like you feel the discipline there. You're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, he's talking to me directly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're really good. I really enjoy doing a training with
Hmm.
his podcast, with his videos, because they're
Yeah.
powerful,
They
like
are.
really, really powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if you're lacking in discipline in your life, if you're having issues in on discipline, you need to listen to Joko's podcast.
And if you're interested in developing yourself as a leader,
Yeah.
he is one to follow for sure. Read all of his books, listen to his podcast, look him up on YouTube. There's a lot of great videos, as Fernando was saying. You'll learn a lot from him. He really, he's a retired Navy SEAL, and he doesn't really, you know, walk around as like he's more important than anybody. He's actually the complete opposite of that. He's out there to help and serve people, and that's what I really like about him. So anyway, Jocko, if you don't know him, look him up. He's great. He'll make you, following him will make you a better person, better leader, better dad, better mother, better whatever you are in your life. So what's our next one?
Yeah, totally. So next one is Maxwell. So yeah, what can you tell us about him, Chris? I know you're more
Yeah.
into John Maxwell also.
Yeah.
So
So I've read a lot of John Maxwell books. I watch a lot of his YouTube videos. I just love that guy. He's a great speaker. He's a great communicator. What I like about him is that he just loves people, and it shows, right? And he's all about developing people to become better leaders. And it's a people focused leadership style that he has, which I really like. He's a former pastor, and he felt that his job or his mission in his life was to leave the ministry and go into the business world and help develop leaders in the business world, which helps create a better work environment for the team. So I was able to meet him one day. I thought it was amazing. It was funny. I went to a conference that he was at, and he was just sitting up there. I'm like, gosh, I think I'm going to go shake his hand and say hi, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, I was nervous. I was like, man, this is John Maxwell. I'm about to shake his hand. And we had a short conversation. I got my picture taken with him. Super cool guy. And I'm like, man, this guy's amazing. I want to be like him. So he's a guy that I listen to often. He's got a podcast. And then obviously he's written 30 something books too. But yeah, what have you read or listened to John? And if so, how does it affect you?
I haven't read his books. I'm going to read some of his books because, as
Mhm.
you mentioned, and I think we did one training about him also.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's just everything about company culture, people focused, and I think this is more like self-reflecting in a
Yeah.
way.
Hmm.
So that's what I like about him. But yeah, now that you're mentioning everything about him, I'm like, I'm going to read his books.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. Yeah,
really
he's
good.
one of the things he says is leadership is influence, and
Oh yeah.
it's all about influencing people and getting people inspired and excited, and how to have tough talks with people, but still do it in a way that they still feel respected and valued, and they feel that love too between human beings. So that's what I really like about John. And I hope one day I could be like him, but there's a lot of work that I need to get into to get to that point. But there's a lot of students under John Maxwell. And
Okay.
then our next person is actually someone who studies under John Maxwell and is in the same network.
Oh yeah. So the next one is Craig Rochelle.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know him because of all the podcasts that I've listened to. He's great. Like he's
Yeah.
really good. And I don't know, his monthly podcast guide, it helped
Hmm.
a lot for
Yeah.
also training. Sorry, I'm mentioning a lot of
That's
training,
good.
but
That's good. That's what
yeah,
we do.
it's exactly that's what we do. And
Hmm.
I don't know, it's pretty helpful. And he's just really precise with what he's saying, and
Yeah.
also he goes to the point, and I really like
Exactly.
that he's direct.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I really like his podcast, and also his lectures that he also puts
Hmm.
in YouTube. They're really good. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what can you tell us about him?
Yeah. So, Craig Rochelle, so before all this, what we do now and before the businesses started, I was in ministry and worked for a church. And that's how I got to hear about John Maxwell. I knew John Maxwell before. That's how I got to meet him. And this is how I learned about Craig Rochelle too. So I started listening to his stuff. He's got a leadership podcast that comes out once a month. Every now and then he'll drop a bonus episode every now and then. A lot of times he'll just talk about topics that leaders struggle with. But there's also times where he does have a guest that come on. So the last guest I believe he had was Tim Tebow, which was amazing. That was a really good podcast. But yeah, so what are some of the things that he says that really stick out to me? He says, everyone wins when the leader gets better, which is true. So, and that's inspiring to me because as someone who's a leader, and to be honest, everyone's a leader. Fernando's a leader. Everyone's a leader. The company, the team, myself, my family, whatever, it will not get better unless I get better, you know? And if all those other entities, other people get better and I don't, then I'm just going to kind of like waste away in a way. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not adding value anymore. So that was a very strong point that he says. And the other part, the thing that he says often is people would rather follow a leader who is always real rather than one who is always right. So that comes into being authentic, being
Totally.
vulnerable, right? Because he talks about vulnerability a lot, and vulnerability as a strength rather than viewed as a weakness, right? So he talks a lot about that, leading with vulnerability, leading with openness and things like that, because all of that builds trust. I listen to Craig a lot. I like him. I think he's a cool dude. And He's a very good speaker, like what you're saying, and he's very articulate. So he can
Yeah.
explain things like, here's a concept. Let me break it down for you. Right. And that's what he does. His podcasts are easy to follow. And he also, like what you're saying, he does have a leadership guide. Every time that he has a podcast, you can download the leadership guide. And that's what we've done with our training, where we downloaded his leadership guide, and then we branded it to our team logo and whatnot. And then we pushed that out to the team, had them watch the podcast, answer the questions, and we get together and we discuss it. And, like I said, that's according to our core values. But it also brings the team together closer because we all struggle with the same things, right? So anyway, that's who Craig Rochelle is to me. He's a cool dude, and he's another guy. I guess maybe everyone on our list is like, man, I want to be like him, right? So, but anyway, so who do we have next?
So we have next Steve Rosenberg.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty happy I got the pleasure to meet him, and he's really nice. And I don't know, for me, I felt empowered when I was like around him. I was like, wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Like I'm around Steve Rosenberg. So
yeah.
I don't know. He's really nice. And also I got the pleasure to hear one of his conference in
Mm-hmm.
Dallas.
Yeah,
And it was really good, just like what he was saying, his story, and just like you get out of his conference and you feel also empowered, like, okay,
yeah,
so I can do it, and hit it, I'll do it. So
yeah. He has a way of speaking that, you know, after listening to him talk, or him like, speaking encouragement into your life, you feel like, you could just grab a knife, put it between your teeth, and charge the hill and go to battle, right? Like, that's how you feel,
yeah,
right? And he has a way of doing that to just spark that fire in you, and keep going. Things that Steve is really good at is business organization, business systems and processes, scaling a business, and he's really great at marketing and sales. So he's a friend of mine. He's also a coach of mine. He's a mentor of mine. He's got a podcast that I listen to as well. He had a big influence into me moving down to Houston. So it's cool to be down here because I get to see him routinely with the network of people that we know. And because of that, I'm growing as a person, as a business person, as a leader, and an influencer in my industry. So I couldn't have done any of that without Steve and his help and his encouragement along the way. So definitely, I'm better because of all these people we listen to, but Steve has, of all of them, has really spent the time working with me, and I owe a lot to him for the success we've had over the last couple of years, for sure.
yeah,
But yeah, so he's also got so you and I attended a 3-day event that he had back in June, and I thought it was amazing. I
yeah.
came out here and I knew it was going to be good, but I was like, crap, I didn't know it was going to be that good. The speakers that he had Weldon Long, he had Dr. Elko, who is Nick Saban's mindset coach, and TW Mock, who's a successful businessman out in the Dallas area, and then a few other people that came in. But yeah, I mean, what was your impression after that 3-day event?
It was amazing. Like, if I'm being honest, it was really good. And like, well, as you said, he had great speakers there, but
Yeah.
also just all the business owners just
Hmm.
interacting with each other. Like, I don't know, I really like that interaction, and
Yep.
I think that doesn't have like any money value, just being with
Exactly.
other business owners and talk with them and say like, okay, so these are the problems that I'm having right now at my company. Okay, me too, I can relate to that.
Exactly.
This is what I'm doing. So I think just being there, everything was like so dynamic,
Hmm.
the activities and everything, like, and I saw that everyone was enjoying it, like
Yeah.
for real,
Oh yeah.
like I saw that while they were having lunch and everything, everyone was talking, everyone was having like this
Yeah.
interactions. And I know you still talk with some business owners
I
that you
do.
met on the event,
Mm.
and they're great. Like I really like that 3-day event. It
Yeah.
was really good. And I don't know, I would recommend it if you have business, like totally go
Yeah.
because it's really good. The things that you're going to get out from the speakers, from Steve,
Mhm.
and from the people that are going to attend to the event, it's
Yep.
just it doesn't have like any money value, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the 3-day event. I mean, the 3-day event is going to be, wow, I got a lot out of that. But
Yeah,
what's great is the relationships that you get out of it. And then later on, afterwards, all the conversations that you have with everyone. So that is like, yeah, like you said, you can't put a value on that, right? Or you can't
yeah,
put a price on that. So yeah, he's got another one coming up next month. And at the end of this episode, you'll be able to see what he has to offer, or what days that's going to be next month in October.
yeah. And I'll put his website link on just the description, just for you to check it. So
Sounds good. Cool.
yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next guy.
So the next one is Trevor Mouch. So his podcast helped us a lot to
Yeah.
get better. It's just like, do you want to talk a little bit about him, and then we can
Yeah.
go to the
So Trevor, how did I was listening to the Bigger Pockets podcast one day, and Trevor was a guest. And I don't remember exactly what they talked about. All I remember is like, oh, I got to look this guy up because I really like what he has to say. And so I looked him up and saw that he had his own podcast, which was the Carrot Cast. And so I started listening to that. He's got my favorite thing that he does every Thursday. He drops a episode called the Trevor Truck Talks, where he talks about his own mindset, things that he's going through as a CEO of a big company, and some of the shifts that he's doing, some of the decisions that he's making based on the economy or whatever it might be. And he's open, he's vulnerable. He's like, hey, this is what I struggle with. And it's one of those things where like, okay, good. Trevor, who's this big influencer, a big company, is going through the same problems I'm going through. So I don't feel alone. Right. And the one thing that I like about Trevor is that he's a very personal guy, and or personable guy. He really does invest time into people. He loves people, and it shows. And just on my personal experience with him is, I knew him just from the podcast, and that's it. But when I made my journey from Washington down to Texas, I made a purpose made a I purposely went through the town he lives in, which is Roseburg, Oregon. And it's kind of a small town. It's not huge. It's a little smaller. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a hotel room. I'm going to send him a message and see if he's willing to meet me for coffee or something, just so I can say thank you for adding value into what we do. And maybe he'll say yes, maybe he'll say no. Either way, I got to go that way anyway. So I sent him a message. He goes, hey, I can't do coffee, but you can come work out with me. And I'm like, yeah, shoot, let's do it. So I went down to Roseburg, Oregon, met him in his office, Carrot headquarters, and got a great workout in with him. Got to talk business, exchange phone numbers and stuff. And we've exchanged a couple texts since then. But he's a really cool dude. And I mean, like I said, I say this about all these guys. He's another guy I really would like to be like. He's a great leader. People love him, and he's got a great business mind. So, but yeah, you want to talk a little bit about how his show has helped us and how we work together?
Yeah, sure. So when I started as an executive assistant, it was the first time for me being an executive assistant, and it was the first time for Chris having an executive
Yeah,
assistant. So
exactly.
we were just trying to figure out everything. It was difficult, but Chris came up with me at me one time and telling me like, "Hey, you need to listen to this podcast. It's great." And
Mhm.
it was what makes an excellent executive assistant.
Yeah.
That's the name of the video if you want to go look it up. And yeah, it was really good. And I remember listening to the podcast and then having all these notes, and we were on the meeting and we're like, okay, so we're doing all this stuff,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
everything that we heard. Okay, so we're going to implement this, and I think that helped us a lot,
It
just
did.
to
Yeah.
build systems and everything in.
Hmm.
Also, the next one is the next level for your executive assistant. So
Hmm.
those two are the ones that we listen to, and it was really good. It makes us, I don't know, at first I wouldn't say we were a mess, but
No, we were just
we
trying to
were
figure
like,
things out.
yeah, we were trying to
Yeah.
figure things out, but it was difficult. So
Yeah.
just having that as a guide, it really helped.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was listening to his podcast and like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, unfortunately, as my assistant, I'm constantly sending Fernanda, hey, listen to this, listen to this. But
Yeah.
this one, I said, okay, you have to listen to it. You have to take notes, and we're going to meet this Friday. We're going to talk about it. So she took notes. I took notes. We met on whatever day it was, and we said, okay, this is what Fernanda learned. This is what I learned. What from here do we want to implement into our working relationship? And I think from there, we decided that, hey, you know what, Chris, stay out of your calendar, right? Because I mess things
Yeah.
up, right? So we talked about that a bit. We talked about how we would do email, that I would step away, kind of let you run it, and you would just let me know when the important things popped in. And so those are just a couple of things, but there's many other things that we discussed that we implemented, and his show made our working relationship better, made our systems a little bit stronger as it relates to how you and I work together. And it was amazing. And, it was so good that that's why I wanted to meet Trevor and just say, hey, look, this is what your show has done to us,
Yeah.
and I'm very grateful that I had that opportunity to tell him that.
Yeah, totally. And also, something that came up to my mind is
Hmm.
that, like, we were having like lack of communication, just
That's
like, for
right. Yeah.
example, like, I don't know, me with college, with
Yeah.
my stuff and with your stuff, like we were like, "Oh, okay, so let's just work." And sometimes you're like, "Oh, Fernanda, what's Fernanda doing?" Or why
Yeah.
Chris is mad, and I think
What
it
Chris is
was it happens. So it's just like we learn to communicate that. It's like, okay, so what's happening? Okay, no worries, just take some time, and I'll go ahead and see what I can do here, or
Yeah.
okay, so I have college next week. How can we fix this and just organize? So yeah, I think that also helped just to build the
Absolutely.
trust between.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's the big thing, right? Trust and the
Yeah.
communication piece. So, I mean, what we did was you put your college schedule onto my calendar. So I knew when you're at school because, I never remember anything, right? So I need to see it. So, which is helpful because I'm always looking. I'm like, oh, Fernanda's in school right now, so I'm not going to bug her.
Yeah.
Or I'll send her a message, but I know I'm not going to hear from her for like 4 hours or whatever it might be. So that was extremely helpful. But it also kind of encouraged you and me to have open conversations about, hey, something's not working here and we need to fix something, right? And then we were both comfortable to have those conversations, and we've had a few of them too where we're like, hey, here's a little tension here we need to kind of work through.
Yeah.
And I think, I know Trevor's 2 episodes really encouraged us to get to that point because he and his assistant also struggled through the same kind of things. So we kind of learned from their tension,
Yeah.
yeah, their mistakes and whatnot, and then we just like, okay, let's not do that. Let's get to where they are right now. Let's agree that you and I can be comfortable with open conversations about like, hey, there's a little tension here, let's talk about it. Or whatever it might be. And I think because of that, we've done really well, and our relationship has gotten better um through that
Yeah,
time.
exactly. And also,
Yeah.
just I wanted to mention, like, also the open communication and everything. It's just, it helped a lot in, for example, on elevation
Hmm.
Pacific, just like sometimes like, hey Chris, I think we can do better in this area, or
Yep.
hey Chris, I'm noticing this, and you're like, oh yeah, I noticed that too, but it's cool, it's good that you're telling me that also, like
Yeah.
having that communication, that trust, that I know you're
Hmm.
not going to get mad. I know you're not going to say like, Fernanda, what you're telling me this. You're going to
Yeah.
be like, okay, so Fernanda is noticing that. Okay,
Yeah.
it's
I got to
good.
pay
Maybe
attention
it's
to it. Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And I learned that because of that podcast, because I remember,
Oh, that's
I
great.
think his assistant saying just like, yeah, I got to be open, and just like more like a mom side, like, hey Chris, you need to do all this stuff, and hey
Yeah.
Chris, remember to do all these things, but also
Hmm.
being comfortable talking with you
Yep.
about the things that you need to pay attention on. But yeah,
Exactly.
it's really good. Really
Yeah.
liked Trevor Trevor's podcast. So yeah,
Yeah. We
that's a
we can
good
go
one.
so deep into Trevor's stuff and how it's helped
Yeah.
us, but that's probably another episode, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So who do we got next?
So the last one that we have is Phil Kornachuk.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, I'll tell you about Phil. So Phil, so I struggle with his last name too. Kornichuk, I think it is,
Yeah,
but I know
sorry
I
about
made
that.
a mess up, and I'm sorry, Phil. But Phil's a friend of mine. Phil and I know each other because we were in Afghanistan together, and I was in the Navy. He was in the Army, so he was an Army Green Beret Special Forces. So I was there to support his team. And when I got there, he and I were the same rank. We're about the same age, but there's a big difference between him and me, and that is he knew how to lead really well. He was calm, he was cool. I remember there were times where he was out on a mission and I was back on base and I was listening to the satellite communications, and I can hear him talking on the radio with gunfire in the background in the middle of combat, and he's calm and he's relaying the information that everyone needed to know. And I just remembered sitting there, and I remember the day. I mean, I just was sitting there. I'm like, I can't believe he is this good and he's leading so well. And then he came back to base. It was like a day or two later. The team came back, and I just remember seeing him. He's just like regular Phil at the computer writing his debrief, for the
Wow.
headquarters. I'm like, gosh, this guy went through combat, and I'm just blown away at his ability to lead in such a very chaotic environment. But the other thing that I noticed too is that his team really liked him, and that really showed because they came in a couple months after I got there. The first team that I was there with, nobody liked anybody on that team. It's like it was just night and day. When Phil came on, he's such a good leader that the environment and the culture on that team was just welcoming, and everyone liked each other, and it made it a lot of fun too. And I owe all of that to Phil. So Phil retired from the Army. He was a lieutenant colonel when he retired. And then his focus is on leadership, which makes sense because he's an excellent leader. And towards the end of his military career, he ended by training other military leaders. So he did it for the special forces, and then he trained college students who are in line to become Army officers. So he trained them on leadership. So what does he do now? Well, he coaches on leadership, and he actually works with me. So we've been talking a lot lately, and he's always been a big influence in my life over the last, I don't know, when I was in Afghanistan 2010. It's what, 12 years ago. And he had a huge impact on my life that I reached out to him recently and said, "Hey Phil, let's work together." So he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I know I'm going to be a better person because of it. So I know you don't know Phil.
Yeah.
Maybe you know a little bit about it, but he knows about you because during our session, I told him about Fernanda and some of the books that she's reading and stuff. He's like, "What? She's 19 and she's doing all that stuff? That's amazing." So, but anyway, I don't know if you have anything to say about Phil. I know you don't know him.
Yeah, I was pretty excited when you said that. I
Yeah.
remember I was listening to your voice message. I was like, really? That's so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't have the pleasure just to meet him or just like
Yeah.
I read a little bit about him, but he sounds like a really good leader.
Yeah.
And I saw when you told me like, hey, I just had the meeting with Bill. It was amazing. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
okay, so it must be pretty good. So
Hmm.
and I don't know, everything that you said, it's inspiring, and
Yeah.
because I know being there and it must be hard. So
Hmm.
just being so calm,
Yeah.
that's what a good leader does, like
Exactly. Yeah.
that inspires also other people to be calm. Like, okay,
Exactly. Yeah.
so the leader is calm. I should be too,
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
really doing good. So yeah, I'm going to read more about him
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's much like Jocko, right? Jocko talks about like, hey, take a step
yeah,
back. He calls it detach, gather
yeah,
more information, and then get back into the fight. Take a breath, relax, calm down, and relay the information that you need to relay, and get back into the fight. So Phil, before extreme ownership was written, Phil was already doing that. So Phil could easily write a book about that too. So anyway, so those are the last three were kind of personal guys that I follow. But all of them, I could say great things about each one of them all day long. They're great people to follow and to read books and listen to. So where are we off to next on this one?
So we have just the last question,
Yeah.
just to close the podcast, is what books do you recommend from these influencers?
Yeah. So I mentioned a couple. Jocko's got one, Extreme Ownership, which I highly recommend. And that's something that I've made some copies for our team and talked about, like Commander's Intent, right?
Yeah.
So we've done that. And it's amazing. I've got, these stay-at-home moms in Mexico talking military talk, saying Commander's Intent and Extreme Ownership and things like that. So it's pretty cool. It's fun for me. But Jocko, obviously, anything that he's written, I've read 3 of his books, and I know he's written several. He's also written a lot of children's books too, that my boys have read. So they're really good. I enjoy those. So that's Jocko. For John Maxwell, like I said, he's written about 30 something books. The last one I read was The Self-Aware Leader, and I finished that a couple weeks ago. Got a lot out of that. It was more like, hey, start reflecting on yourself and understanding how you're showing up for people, and be aware of that. And then make adjustments if necessary. Craig Rochelle, I know he just wrote a book that I think was released last week, but the one before that was Winning the War in Your Mind, which was really big for our team, right? Because we did some training based on that book. And I think that was a very strong training session where people really got into it. And we got to know some people, and we got closer because of it. So we have Craig to thank for that. Steve Rosenberg wrote Building an Empire, Failing Our Way to Millions. And that's his story about how he made so many mistakes, but ended up getting to a point where he built a company with his partner, Pete Newbig, who is on our first guest on the show. How they went from, just failing, making mistakes, to building a company where they were able to sell it for millions and millions of dollars. So that was a good book to read. Trevor Mock, he's actually working on a book now. He hasn't written one yet, but he's working on one now. So I'm looking forward to that. I think he'll have something very good to say in those books. And Phil, I don't think Phil's written a book. I haven't asked him, but I know he has a book in him. And I'd love to encourage him to write one, because he's got some great stories of combat, leadership in combat, and he's also done a lot of coaching, where he can do some case studies too in his book, and kind of mention how things have changed for some people that he's mentored over the years. So anyway, so those are some of the things from those guys.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, I'll have them on my list to read them.
Yeah,
it's really
too. Good. Excellent. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening to this show. Like, there's so many more people that we follow. This is just a quick short list that top people that come to our mind that Fernanda and I talk about often. And whenever we want to do training, it's usually something from these people here on our list. But anyway, thanks for listening to our show. And Fernanda, you want to close us out?
Yeah. So we'll leave all the social media from them just in the description. If you want to go follow them, you won't regret it. So yeah, thank you so much for another episode, and stay virtual.
Hey everyone, Steve Rosenberg, and we're here in Florida with palm trees, beaches, sunshine. You do not want to miss my Business Mansion Mastermind, October 12th through the 14th in Houston, Texas. I'm going to show you how to take your business to the next level, and I'm bringing in some of the top people in the business world. I'm talking Brad Lee, the Iron Cowboy, Dr. Kevin Elko, and Errol Allen, all to help you reshape your business and your mindset in 3 days, followed by unlimited coaching after that. Go to bizmansion.com, and I'll see you in Houston.